Hello, I'm Ralph Gable of the Electronics for the Inquisitive Experimenter YouTube channel. This is the seventh and last video in the series on vector network analyzers. In the previous videos, I answered questions like, what is the VNA and why do I care to use one? What kind of measurements can I make with my VNA? What are the terms I need to understand to effectively use my VNA? How do I do a single port calibration and measurement using my VNA? And then I broke the video answering the question, how do I do two-port calibration and measurement, into two different videos. In this, the last video in this series, I just want to go through a few of the basic differences between the high-end VNAs and their more affordable cousins. If you find this video helpful, please click on the like and subscribe to this channel so that you'll be notified of new videos when they come out. So let's talk about some of these differences. Let's talk about the most obvious differences, the most significant differences between the higher-end VNAs and their more affordable cousins. And the most startling difference has to be the cost associated with it. Now, I went out to the internet and I was looking for, okay, how much does it cost to get the higher-end VNAs, buy this, buy that? And a lot of the sites said, well, you have to request a quote. So I didn't get numbers from those. I only went out and got numbers from the sites that actually was willing to tell me what they were going to charge me for the VNA. That was for both the higher-end VNAs and the lower-end VNAs. And what I discovered was that the higher-end VNAs for a new VNA is going to run between $9,000 and $60,000. And then the cal kit to go with these, again, a brand new one, run between $500 and you can pay as much as $10,000 for a calibration kit for your VNA. And then the cables, of course, you have to connect up somehow. Looking out there, what I did is I says, okay, I want cables that are 4 foot long, and looked at genuine VNA cables and came up with prices anywhere from $100, which was the low end, up to $1,000 for a 4-foot cable. Just incredible. Now, that gives me a bottom line here for if I were to pick the cheapest of each of these, because you need 2 cables, by the way, so that's $200 for this. That's $9,000 plus $500 plus $200. That is $9,700 for the low-end VNA if you're going to buy all of these commercially available. At the high end, if I were to go for the high end, it comes out to $72,000. Now, on the other hand, we have the low-end VNAs. You can go out to Walmart and buy a nanoVNA for under $50. I think Amazon might even have that same one. There are nanoVNA kind of kits that might run in the $200 range, and that includes the cal kit and the cables and the nanoVNA and the whole bit, running, like I said, around $200, $175, somewhere in there. And then the nanoVNA Tiny is around the $600 mark, between $550 and $600. Now, if you go out and just buy the cal kit by itself, it runs right around $30, but that's with SMA connectors. Now, understand this, the high-end stuff over here will likely have end connectors, which are easy to interface to a number of different things. The low-end VNAs all use these SMA connectors, which are very small connectors. So these standards are SMA. These cables that we're talking about here, by and large, are all SMA to SMA. Like if you buy the $150, $200 kit for the nanoVNA, it comes with VNA or SMA to SMA connectors. It comes with a complete cal kit with both male and female calibration standards, as well as the that cable and the nanoVNA. A nice little kit for the price, I'm telling you. It's got everything in it, everything that you're going to need. But you're still stuck with SMA connectors, and the vast majority of anything that you're going to be connecting to in the world doesn't use SMA connectors. So you're going to have adapters associated with it that you're going to have to accommodate. Anyway, so bottom line here for the low end, you can get away with less than $100 to buy the low-end VNAs, including the VNA itself, the cal kit, and 2 cables. Or you can go up higher, and between the cost of the VNA and everything, drop about $600, $650, something like that. So that's the first and most obvious difference, is these costs associated with it. But then there are also the specifications. How good is the VNA at actually doing the kinds of things that you might be interested in doing? Now, before I can talk about specifications, we need to define a couple terms that make sense of the specifications we're going to be looking at. The first one is noise floor. The noise floor is the minimum measurable power of the VNA. Any signal that lays below that level is indiscernible in the bottom of that noise. And a really good example of that is like listening to a shortwave radio, just like this. Here's an example of a radio. On this band, at this time, at this frequency, you can see my noise floor is sitting right at S9. And if a signal comes in at S5 down here, it's going to be completely covered up by this noise that we see coming in here. You can see it even looks like a floor right across the band scope. And next, we can talk about the dynamic range. Dynamic range is the difference between the analyzer's maximum input power that it can measure and the noise floor. Now, for measurement to be valid, it has to lay between that maximum input level and the noise floor. Increasing that dynamic range is important if you need to measure very large variations in signal amplitude, such as the filter bandpass and rejection. I mean, think about a duplexer. Now, with a duplexer, you have a pass band and a reject band. And at the pass band, you're expecting an insertion loss about 1 to 1.5 dB-ish in that area. So the signal level goes into the duplexer, comes out at -1 or -1.5 dB at the pass frequency. And then at the reject frequency, that signal will dip down to -80 to -100 dB, and with some duplexers it's possible to even do better than that. Now, if your VNA's dynamic range isn't sufficient, when that signal goes down past the lower end, that noise floor of your VNA, you won't have a clue what the rejection actually is. You'll just know that it's somewhere below the noise floor. Now that we have this foundation in place, let's talk about some of those specifications that are of interest as we consider VNAs. So let's talk about specific specifications now that we have these foundations in place. One of them is the minimum and maximum frequencies that each one will do. And the real differences between each of the VNAs really appear to be more in the minimum frequency than the maximum frequency. because with the nanoVNA, it was 50 kilohertz. With the miniVNA Tiny, it would only go down to 1 megahertz. With the next version, the nanoVNA V2, it was still 50 kilohertz. And with the higher-end VNA, it was 100 kilohertz. But the maximum, too, was also affected. The original nanoVNA only went up to 900 megahertz, whereas all the rest were rated up to 3 gigahertz. But let's talk about frequency resolution. What exactly is frequency resolution? Frequency resolution is where, if there are two signals on the screen, how close can they get before they turn into a single signal? So what is the distance between these that they're still discernible as two separate signals or responses? Now, with the nanoVNA and the miniVNA Tiny, that was never specified. With the nanoVNA V2, that was specified as 10 kilohertz. And that seems pretty good, except when you consider a single sideband signal has a bandwidth of about 3 kilohertz. So the frequency resolution of this nanoVNA V2 is over 3 times the bandwidth of a single sideband signal. Pretty sloppy if you're trying to do any kind of real filter work. The Tektronix VNA has a frequency resolution of 1 hertz. That's quite sufficient for anything I can think of trying to do. Now, we've already talked about dynamic range, the maximum measurable signal to the noise floor, that difference. With the nanoVNA, we're talking about 70 dB. Gets worse over 300 megahertz. So up to 300 megahertz, you got 70 dB of dynamic range, and then it just gets worse and worse as you go up in frequency. With the miniVNA Tiny, they don't really tell you about its entire range and what its dynamic range is. All they do is they say, well, at 500 megahertz, it's 70 dB. The nanoVNA V2, they give you a little more of a feeling of it. It's 70 dB up to 1.5 gigahertz. So for the most part, this kind of stuff we're going to be doing, it's going to be 70 dB. And again, it gets worse as you go beyond that 1.5 gigahertz. On the other hand, the Tektronix VNA, well, it starts out at 112 dB from 300 kilohertz to 1 megahertz. And it actually gets better the higher the frequency you go. So by the time you get to the frequencies between 200 megahertz and 3 gigahertz, we're looking at 125 dB of dynamic range. Now, talking about noise floor, remember that's that noise down in the bottom below which the signal is indiscernible. Well, again, the nanoVNA and the miniVNA Tiny, they don't even specify that. They give you no clue what that noise floor is. The nanoVNA V2 says that it only will specify it for S11 or reflection, and they say that it is 50 dB up to 1.5 gigahertz. Now, the Tektronix VNA, on the other hand, now this is the general noise floor, not specified as part of the reflection, but the general noise floor for the VNA is 110 dB from 300 kilohertz to 1 megahertz. And by the time you get up to 200 megahertz to 3 gigahertz, it's 125 dB down, minus 125 dB. So it's way down there. Source signal is also an important thing to think about too, because with the miniVNA Tiny, when we were measuring the preamplifier, because its signal source was a fixed minus 6 dB, we had to use an attenuator between the VNA and the received preamplifier to get that level down below the maximum level for the input of that received preamp. The nanoVNA is minus 13 dB. Again, fixed. It is what it is. The nanoVNA V2, I was not able to find anything that told me what its source signal level was. I'm assuming it might be similar to its older cousin, but there's no way to tell. With the Tektronix VNA, it is adjustable from minus 50 to plus 10 dB. And that means that I don't have to use that attenuator, because if I need a minus 35 dB signal, I just tell the VNA, I want that source signal to be minus 35 dB. I don't have to attenuate anything. It's a done deal. And then finally, accuracy and precision. Now, here are two terms that are often misunderstood. We think of something that is precise as being really accurate. Well, not necessarily so. The best way to illustrate the difference between accuracy and precision is to think about a person shooting a bow and arrow at a target. Now, Clyde shoots his bow and arrow, and boy, he is really, really, really a precise archer. He can hit the same spot every time, and he's just about putting one arrow on top of the other. It's just doing a beautiful job of shooting that bow and arrow, very precise, hitting the same spot. The problem is, this spot he's hitting, he's aiming at the bullseye and hitting over here to the right on the support post for the target and 3 inches above the ground. So he might be very precise in that he can hit the same spot every time, but he's not very accurate. He's got to work on that. And what I found with the precision of the miniVNA Tiny was that it seemed reasonably precise. It was giving me the same numbers every time. The problem was its accuracy seemed to lack. Now, the case in point, I go back to the RF preamplifier. I measured the gain of the RF preamplifier using the miniVNA Tiny and the Higher-End VNA. There was a significant difference between those two as to what they measured. And that was true even when I used exactly the same method of measurement with the Higher-End VNA as I did with the miniVNA Tiny. I used the same attenuator. I did everything exactly identical, except using different measurement instruments. Now, part of that is its measurement accuracy was included in this, or inaccuracy of measurement actually, was included in its measurement twice, because first I had to measure the attenuation of the attenuator that went between it and the unit I was testing. Second, I had to measure the gain of the entire system, which included the attenuator and the unit under test and everything. And then I subtracted those two, the attenuation from the gain, and got the gain of the amplifier itself. So let's just say that, now they don't specify this, so don't get me wrong here. Let's just say that the accuracy of the miniVNA Tiny is 2% accurate. Now, 2% accurate in measuring the attenuation of my attenuation box. 2% accurate in measuring the gain of the entire system, including the attenuation box. So it is possible at that point for my final measurement to be off by as much as 4%. It just kind of snowballs on you. But with all that said, how accurate is accurate enough? The answer to that question is as accurate as you need it to be in order to do what you want to do. Now, for most of us, the accuracy that's afforded in these much cheaper VNAs is probably quite sufficient what we're trying to do. So why spend the money on a Cadillac when a VW Beetle will do? So with that, let's talk about the types of measurements also possible. So what kind of measurements can we make with the low-end VNAs versus the high-end VNAs? Well, to begin with, this goes back to the number of ports and the kind of ports that each has. Now, these lower-end VNAs have 2 ports, but one port is the source port, and it can do the reflection type measurements. So it is both transmitting a signal out and looking for a signal coming back to it. So it can do reflected power, it can do VSWR and reflection coefficients and all that kind of fun stuff. It can measure impedances and all that stuff. And then its second port, and here's where the real difference comes in. The second port is a receiver only. It only can listen. And that is for doing the through type stuff. And in that case, working together, it takes whatever the source signal is here and is listening over here for that signal to return and providing a through or a transmission type measurement. So that's S11 or S21. The source is port 1, the receive is port 2. Now the high-end VNAs essentially has 2 ports, but you'll notice that this port here has both ascend and receive. This port has both ascend and receive, so both ports can do reflection type measurements. But that also means we can send a signal from port 1 to port 2 and measure the through or the transmission from port 1 to port 2, but because we can go the other way, we can also go and send a signal out of port 2 to port 1 to see what it looks like in the other direction. So with certain types of filters, you want to be able to look in both directions. You want to be able to make sure that both ends are properly impedance matched, because it's just as important that the input of a filter be matched to 50 ohms as it is for the output to be matched to 50 ohms, so both sides match the system that they're put in. And this here, with able to do S11, S21, S12, and S22, you just hook up your cables, you can put all that stuff on the screen all at the same time and done without having to move anything. Now, you can do these other measurements with the low end, but it takes some cable swapping. So you set it all up and you measure it in one direction, and then you swap your cables and you measure it in the other direction. So you can still do the measurements, but this, you can have it all on the screen at the same time, and you can tweak the output impedance, output match, and the input match, and everything in both directions without having to swap anything. Now, again, for everything that the average electronics tinkerer is interested in doing, these are quite sufficient. Okay, maybe there might be the rare occasion where you're going to be swapping cables back and forth to tune a filter or something, but for the most part, this is all we need. So there you go. So in the end, it all boils down to what you're trying to do, whether you can accomplish this with your nanoVNA or have to buy a higher-end VNA. For the majority of people who buy these less expensive VNAs, they'll do everything that they need to do and probably even more. Accuracy isn't such a big issue as long as they're close, in other words. Like with the preamplifier measurement, I just wanted to see if the preamplifier was working and to get a general idea of its actual gain. I really didn't need to know the exact gain figure of it, as long as it was somewhere in the ballpark of what they said it was supposed to have been. In fact, in the process of looking at this, I discovered, oh, the gain at the low end was acting strangely, and it turned out it was because of a of a bad connection. I cured that connection, and there we go. It was a great way to discover what was going on inside the box of that preamplifier. On the other hand, if you're planning on doing something like tuning duplexers, then these low-cost VNAs just won't do the job. You're stuck either buying a higher-end VNA or finding someone who has one so that you can do the measurements you need to do. So there you go. VNAs, fast and furious. Well, I don't know. 7 videos, how fast and furious is that? But nonetheless, there you go. Now, if you have found this video helpful, please be sure to click on the like and subscribe so that you will be notified when new videos come out. In the meanwhile, thank you so much for watching. Toodaloots.